Four American soldiers go missing in Europe near the border with one of our adversaries. The latest development in this story reminds us all about what's at stake. I'm Jenna, and this is Smarter News. The story we're about to cover surfaced unexpectedly last week, and the headlines were mysterious and pretty basic at the beginning. Four soldiers go missing in Lithuania, not far from the border with Belarus, a key ally of Russia. Now, a week later, we have some knowledge as to what transpired, but still many, many questions. The soldiers drove out into the darkness to help a vehicle immobilize in a training area. They drove a big armored vehicle, an M88 Hercules, which, like its name, is meant to be big and strong and tough and tow a tank if necessary. We don't know what happened next, but somehow this vehicle becomes submerged in what was described to me as a sinkhole in a boggy, swampy, densely forested area. Now, as we start a new week, 3 of the soldiers' bodies have been discovered. The 4th one, as of this recording, remains undiscovered, but the recovery effort continues. So, what are we to make of all of this? It was a good opportunity to speak to a retired armored officer in the U.S. Army, one who commanded multiple units from company to battalion and is now a retired lieutenant colonel with more than 20 years of experience. And a twist of fate, he also served with my husband in a combat zone in Iraq. So I'm lucky to call Mike Bajema a friend, and here's our conversation. Mike, I'm sure Leif, my husband, shared with you that when he was growing up, he had in his mind that he wanted to be a Navy SEAL. My question for you, because I don't think we've ever talked about this, is did you always want to go into the Army, and was tanks your thing from a young age, or when did you become interested in being the tank guy?
That's a great question. I mean, my grandfather was in the Army. My dad was drafted in Vietnam in the Army. So I think I was Army of choice. But yes, I always wanted to be on tanks. There was something very fascinating about something so heavy, so powerful, and then being able to ride on them. You know, a small guy like me, you feel like Superman. So yeah, definitely tanks was where I wanted to be at.
You've seen a lot of terrain. You've seen combat. You have an understanding of what it takes in combat, what sort of equipment is used in combat. But you spent some time in Europe, and I know you weren't deployed in the same way you were to Iraq, to areas of Eastern Europe, like we're talking about today in Lithuania, but you spent a little time there. So when you first saw these headlines of the 4 soldiers going missing somewhere in Lithuania, near the border of Belarus, like what went through your mind?
Yeah, I mean, number one, the Baltics, you know, in the south is Lithuania, the middle is Latvia, and to the north is Estonia. Recently becoming NATO partners, how important they are to the region. Number one, they really limit Russia's ability to influence the Baltics. Russia has only 2 small access points to what they call NATO's lake, which is the Baltic Sea. One is St. Petersburg, right next to Finland, and then one borders Lithuania, Kaliningrad. Is just a little small little dot there that they have access to the Baltic Sea. So when I saw the headlines of Lithuania, how important that country is and the rest of the Baltics are to the NATO operations.
It's important to think about that and think about the map. I saw the areas again on the map that you're talking about, and it's a little bit confusing when you see these little parts just kind of cordoned off for Russia, and you think, wait a minute, is that really supposed to be there? But again, it's strategically a really important place. These soldiers were riding in or operating in an M88 Hercules. What is that? Why is it important?
I mean, just think of it as a mobile fix-it station. It has the ability to really do anything and everything from a tank breaking down. You call an M88 Hercules, it can latch onto it and pull that tank back to safety, do some maintenance on it, and then get the tank back into the fight. It has a boom that can be dropped over the front. It can lift a vehicle up in order to do maintenance. It can lift the tank engine out of the tank and put a new one in very quickly, and the tank is back in the fight. So it's really the workhorse of an armored division, an armored unit to just keep us mobile on the battlefield and keep us in the fight.
How does it compare to the size of a tank, like a tank that you would be commanding? It's hard for me to even wrap my mind around how big these machines are.
Yeah, and when you see one for the first time, you think it's a tank. I mean, just how big it is. It's actually taller than a tank. It's longer than a tank. Its track is wider than a tank. Um, so it needs all that weight and that track size and everything to pull smaller vehicles with ease out of the mud or anything else. It's an enormous vehicle. So when you think of a tank next to a Mike 88, you would think the Mike 88 is a tank because it's so much bigger, but
Uh,
it's missing the very important thing, which is the cannon. That's the
well,
only
that
difference.
well, that's good, and that's an important thing. You want that cannon at certain
Yes.
times, but that gives us some perspective of just how big of a machine that we're talking about. And that was really important when we were talking last week because I gave you a call and just said, "Hey, I'm having a hard time understanding this." And I actually was able to speak to the U.S. military this weekend, Mike. It was very very helpful. And I have some parts of the story, but there's still parts of the story that we don't know. So what we know about what happened is actually not much. We know that these soldiers went out to go help recover a vehicle that was immobilized in some way during a training session. They went out in the middle of the night, and the area that they were in is described as very, very swampy, like swampland with dense forests, and that watery area and the sand around it is clay like. And all of a sudden they disappear and no one knows where they are. Eventually, what's found out is that their vehicle is submerged underwater, completely submerged underwater. We still don't know where the soldiers are. This lasts for several days. And then just today, we learned that the military was able, through a huge engineering feat, to pull this vehicle back to the surface. And they were able to recover three of the bodies of the soldiers, and they're still looking for the fourth. When I describe this situation to you, Mike, what goes through your mind?
I think first of all, my focus on those four soldiers that perished in this recovery operation, and um, just honoring them that they're not only serving our country but really protecting the United States and our allies from other countries that want to put influence on the Baltics. And then I read the news articles, and even if the articles didn't cover the recovery of this vehicle and those soldiers, it's a Herculean effort in order to do that. So, no armchair quarterback here, but I do have some questions. As I was thinking, if I were in this situation, um, what were some of the first thoughts that would be going through my mind if I was a part of this unit? One of the first ones is when you're in a new training area and you're not 100% familiar with it, the Army's very good at identifying risk and mitigating risk. So if it is boggy and swampy, and obviously it's got water hazards, what risk mitigation was in place? Did it have a second vehicle that was following it to make sure it didn't get lost?
Do these vehicles have tracking on them? I don't want to, give away any top secret intel. Like, would there be a GPS similar to your car has on it, or is there something that would track a big vehicle like this?
Yeah, without, just from a layman's perspective, they do.
The reason why I ask is that there seems to be, and again, this is the impression I'm receiving following a press release, also speaking directly with the military in Europe. They found the vehicle submerged in water, completely submerged, and it took them a little time to find it. It wasn't something that they knew right away where it was, which also raises some questions.
One, these vehicles are extremely heavy. They are not going to float. What I really took away from the news articles that are coming out is this vehicle was 13 feet underwater and in 6 feet of mud under that. Uh, that's that's incredible. If you look at it like an Olympic-sized pool, that's usually like an 11-foot pool. They teach people how to do scuba training in 11 feet. 13 feet is really deep. They're doing joint training with the Lithuanian army. I understand that there was even Polish army involved in this NATO joint training. How much did they know that these boggy or swampy areas were that deep? And then, what risk mitigation measures were put in place to stop a 70-ton vehicle from driving in something that could potentially be 13 feet deep.
Are sinkholes common in that part of the world? Is it common to have that sort of extensive swamp where you could be in an area where you're standing on muddy ground and then suddenly in a deep pool of water?
It definitely is. I mean, the terrain of Lithuania is only a few feet above sea level. So it's very flat ground, very wooded, and a lot of it is very moss covered due to the amount of rain that they get. And unlike swamps, that's what makes a bog different, is it's not a river that just doesn't flow quickly. It actually is rainwater that makes a bog. So I imagine if it's in the rainy season, the spring type season, maybe these areas are deeper than they normally are.
It's you mentioned it that obviously a machine this heavy doesn't float, but I think for some of this again on the outside we could think, well, if you drive into water, like you have a couple minutes, like can't you throw open the hatch and like get out of there, or like is it airtight for a little bit, or like you're thinking all these different scenarios that you see in the movie. Can you address any of those, Mike? Like how much time would you have if you suddenly did drive into water in that sort of a vehicle and suddenly realize it, and is it airtight to any capacity? Like it's a horrible thing to think about, but it gives us an idea of an emergency and how catastrophic this situation is. What's your best estimate on any of that?
Well, I mean, there is some air tightness to all the vehicles. They're designed to protect the crew in multiple environments. Um, but they're also armored for a reason. And that reason is if the enemy is shooting at these vehicles, they have that armor protection to protect the crew. So any kind of door, any kind of hatch is it's it's thick armor and really heavy. And then if you put the weight of any kind of water behind that, where a door may be hard to get open on a Mike 88, even just opening it normally in the air, now you have hundreds of pounds of water forcing that door closed. Um, that's why it is such a hazard anytime an armored vehicle is around water. They're designed to protect the crew on dry ground, um, not to be underwater. So it's just a
Yeah.
horrific event.
As we're learning more and more about it, and again, I was having this conversation this weekend, you just start thinking like this was absolutely the worst case scenario. And even if you had people around, even if you had a tracking vehicle, which we don't know if they did, I asked that follow up, by the way, we don't know if they did, there may not be enough time. It just kind of gives us an idea of how important training is, what the risks are, and how high the stakes are. I think we have this impression that if you're in a big tank driving anywhere in Europe because of World War II, like you're good. And this certainly shatters that impression for a lot of us, that of just how dangerous this work is and how dangerous training can be too. I mean, anything else that you're left with, Mike? Just any thoughts as we kind of close out here as we're thinking of those four soldiers?
Yeah, I would just say for the men and women that are following this, uh, there are hundreds of thousands of soldiers, airmen, Marines all around the world doing very dangerous things for us every single day. And even training in Europe in a friendly country is extremely dangerous. And we can see how what they thought was going to be a routine recovery in a peacetime training environment is dangerous. And so they have our thoughts and our prayers for their family and for their fellow soldiers as they're going through this hard time.
Yeah, it was so well said, Mike. Thank you for that. And I will follow up with some of the questions too, because understanding that and perhaps shining light so that we don't have a similar situation happen again is really important. So we're on it, and I appreciate your insight, Mike. Thank you so much.
Thank you.